Chord changes are one of the things that beginner guitar players often get stuck on. You can sort of do the chord, but you're getting muted notes, it's a little bit sloppy, and maybe you're struggling to change chords quickly enough. I'm going to give you 5 exercises that I believe will help you achieve successful, smooth chord changes. Let's begin. It's very common to see beginner guitar players build their chords one finger at a time. For example, with a C major chord, they would place their first, second and then their third finger before strumming the chord. Now, even though the fingers do go down pretty quickly, one after the other, what you actually want is for all of those fingers to land on the right strings and frets at the same time. And the way to practice this is by doing finger push-ups. So you make the chord as you normally would, a C major chord, and then you bring your fingers as far away as you can, and then you bring them back down to the right strings and frets, landing them at the same time, and that really is the crucial part of the exercise. Then you strum the chord, you bring the fingers away, you bring the fingers back, you strum the chord, you bring the fingers away, bring them back, strum the chord, and repeat that process. What you might do is set a 2-minute timer and do this for each of the chords that you're struggling with. This is an elaboration on the previous exercise, except now you're going to go between 2 different chords. So let's say, for example, you need to go between C and G. Well, you'll do 1 finger push up on C, strum the chord, bring the fingers away, bring them back down, this time onto the G chord, and then strum G, bring the fingers away, and then back to C and strum C. I recommend only doing 2 chords at a time. And again, set a timer and off you go. Here are some guidelines for the fretting hand wrist position. Please bear in mind that this is going to be affected by whether you're playing standing up with a strap, in which case your guitar might be too high or too low on your body, and that's going to affect your wrist position, or whether you're sitting down. Sitting down is a nice neutral place to start. At the moment I've got the guitar sat on my knee, the guitar is slightly raised, partly because I want you to be able to see my wrist when it's on camera. So let's start first of all with my current wrist position, which is neutral. I'm not fretting any chord, I've just got my fingers there sat on the strings on the fretboard. But watch what happens when I go and play a D chord. The wrist drops down and moves forward. This is neutral, this is a D chord. And then when I reach further up towards the ceiling for a C chord, did you notice? My wrist moved again. This is a D, and this is a C. So that wrist is always, either consciously or unconsciously, changing position. What happens when I do an F bar chord, for example? Notice how much further forward my wrist has come now, and even my arm is moving a little bit to accommodate that, because the fingers need to push into the fretboard, therefore they require just that little bit more length as they push against the thumb. The thumb, of course, will be on the back of the neck, somewhere around the middle, but it hasn't got to be absolutely perfect. The one thing you want to avoid is having your thumb really, really high and your wrist really, really high like this and kind of clenching. It's very common to see beginners will play a C chord like that with the thumb over the neck. Now I know, because I did this myself for many years and made this mistake, that it isn't a very efficient way to play a C chord. It's going to catch up with you later on, especially if you want to go down a more complex route of guitar playing. It's going to affect the way you play scales, the way you play chords, and you're going to have to lower that thumb and put the wrist into a nice healthy drop. I call this a healthy drop of the wrist. Now there is one exception to this thumb rule, and that is if you watch players like Ed Sheeran or John Mayer and countless others, they might do a chord like this with the thumb. This is a D with an F sharp in the bass, and you'll notice that my wrist has again risen into that position that I told you not to put it in. But this is a very intentional decision that they are making to play these kinds of chords. And then once they've finished playing these kind of chords with the thumb, they will revert to a more relaxed position, where the wrist has more of a drop in it. Hey, future Aaron here. While I was editing this video, I realised I'd missed out a crucial point, and that is with the thumb, if you're doing an A chord, a D chord, a C chord, for example, you may well be using the thumb to mute the open strings, and in the contemporary guitar world that is completely acceptable. Just avoid really lifting your wrist too high and clenching and creating any tension. In the classical guitar world, it's not acceptable to use the thumb, so some teachers may teach you this drop wrist has to stay there. I don't personally believe that true to be contemporary guitar, and you can see plenty of examples as why that's not the case, but I understand why the classical world does it. Okay, on with the video. One thing I've noticed in beginner guitar players when they're working on their chord changes, let's say for example between D and C, is that they'll try to keep an eye on both hands at the same time. Now this, in its essence, is very sensible because building coordination means building coordination between the two hands. However, what tends to happen some of the time is the picking hand will often hit the wrong strings, and this is especially prominent with the D chord. So say for example we end up playing all 6 strings of the D chord instead of just the 4 that we're meant to play. You get all this low end muddiness that comes into the chord change. So what I'll suggest is focusing only on the picking hand, like this. Don't be tempted to look across to your fretting hand. And if you can practice this, it'll have a twofold benefit. That is, you'll find it more easy to hit the correct strings when you're playing your D chord or whichever other chord you're doing that has the wrong strings being played. And you'll also be rehearsing the fretting hand being able to play chords without looking at it. Are you finding that some of your chords have muted notes in, kind of like this? You're coming across these strings that you can't quite get the sound out of. I have a slightly flexible opinion on this. I think you should be able to get the chord to a stage where it is good enough, okay? It doesn't have to be perfect. The reason for that is because chord changes and building strength in the wrist and the fingers and coordination does take time. So you need to get your chord to a point where it kind of sounds like the chord, but you don't want to get so wrapped up in the fact that you've got these slightly off notes that you're hindering your own progress by kind of refusing to work on the chord changes until this chord is absolutely perfect. Remember, learning the guitar is a process that takes months and years. It's not days and weeks. So maybe cut yourself a little bit of slack. Don't be too much of a perfectionist about this, and try and seek results, like I say, over the months and years. If you found this video helpful, why not check out the video that's on your screen now.